On weeknights, the number 14 Night Ridge left the downtown loop at 11:55 p.m., humming past shuttered storefronts and the late glow of laundromats. Nora Reyes knew every pothole by the way the steering wheel trembled and every bus stop by the shape of the shadows waiting there. She was 27, American, and good at getting people home. That was the way she thought of her job, not as driving, but as returning people to the places that knew their names. The bus was never quiet. It spoke in coins rattling in the farebox, in earbuds leaking a thin whisper of someone's favorite song, in shoe soles scraping salt off the floor. A man in a neon vest rode 2 stops and fell asleep against the window. A nursing assistant clutched a paper cup that steamed like a small campfire in her hands. A pair of teenagers tried to make their laughter into armor. A block before the river bridge, Nora saw the trouble coming. It had a certain posture. 2 guys for whom midnight was a dare angling toward the back row, pinballing off the poles. The last boarder was a quiet one, in a work jacket carrying a notebook. He chose a seat halfway back aside from everyone else. When the 2 loud men veered into his row, the air changed. She saw shoulders tilt and throats tense in the mirror that let her read her passengers like a string of small stories. She eased the bus to a stop and keyed the mic. Remember, folks, everyone's got places to be. Keep seats open and hands to yourselves. Sometimes saying an obvious thing out loud made people remember the rules of being human. Sometimes it did not. One of the loud men leaned over the quiet passenger's knee. "You write about us, man." His grin had brittle edges. "No," the quiet man said. The other one slapped the notebook. "Then close it." Nora unbuckled, stepped down the aisle, and felt the bus shrink around all 4 of them. She did not shout. She did not threaten. She moved her body into the space that was trying to close around the quiet man and said, "We stop at River and Delaney in 90 seconds. If you want to be on it, you keep this seat open." She held their eyes the way you hold a stray dog's gaze so it does not bolt or bite. A small thing shifted. Not fear. Calculation. The first man smirked and slid to the opposite seat. The second followed. The bus exhaled. "Thank you," the quiet man said. "Seatbelt of the bus is me," Nora said, half smiling. "Keep your notebook. River and Delaney in 1 minute now." She drove on, the city unfurling again, the river throwing back the bus's own light in broken moving pieces. The quiet man showed up again 2 nights later, and again the week after that. He always boarded near a block of warehouses that had been half converted into co-working spaces with names that sounded like vitamins. He paid in cash, nodded, and sat in the same place. Once Nora watched him give his seat to a woman balancing a sleeping toddler on her shoulder without making anything of it. Another night, he poured half his bottle of water into a bowl for a dog someone cradled in a winter coat. On a Tuesday that had the feel of a Tuesday even after midnight, he stayed after the bus emptied out at Night Ridge Station. While Nora swept rock salt and fast food straw wrappers from the floor, he stood by the back door with his notebook closed. "You handle trouble fast," he said. "It helps that this bus is my kingdom," Nora said lightly. "I am the benevolent queen of dents and transfers." He smiled, then looked at the maps taped behind her. She had added thin pencil lines between official routes, little wishful connections where she believed buses should go at night, so people like the nursing assistant would not walk 12 blocks in the dark. "You drew those," he said. "When it is slow," she said. "I like to think about better ways to stitch the city." He nodded. "I am Evan." He said it like a simple truth, not an introduction. "Nora," she said. He looked like someone who was learning how to be in a room again. Nothing obvious in his face, but a certain care with words, as if each one might break if he dropped it too hard. After that, their exchanges were brief, often practical. She told him which seat had the best heater. He told her which stop had a busted streetlight and should be reported. When she got sick one night and fought through a cough, he left a small packet of lemon tea on the fare box with a note that said simply, "You get people home. I hope somebody gets you there too." She took the tea home and drank it leaning against her kitchen counter in a studio apartment where the radiator clicked like an old insect. She read the sentence again and pressed the folded paper flat with her palm. Winter locked in, and with it came the long tests of small endurance. Sleet pinged the bus like a handful of thrown rice. Tires chewed slush into the street. People boarded wrapped in layers of their day, the smell of fryer oil, the ache of 12 hours on feet, the strict math of 2 jobs and 1 bus pass. Nora loved these people in the quiet way you love strangers, whose habits you know better than their names. A man carried flowers at 1 in the morning with no explanation. A woman memorized real estate listings as if they were prayers. A boy in a delivery jacket cried once in the last row and hid his face in his elbows, and Nora handed back a clean rag without asking a thing. When her mind needed to hold something other than the route she held her mother's last months. Her mother had been a day-shift driver who taught Nora how to stand steady in a moving world. "You cannot stop the bus from shaking," her mother had said when Nora grew tall enough to see over the wheel. "You can stop yourself from shaking." After cancer took her mother, Nora did not finish the classes she had started at the community college. Tuition went where rent and food went. There was no villain in that story, just a long series of choices that looked like the best available option at the time. On a night when the wind screamed like a kettle, Evan boarded and held up a hand in greeting. He did not ask questions that pried. He noticed things. He noticed when she ran early and pulled over to wait for the schedule to catch up. He noticed when she calmed a man whose temper was louder than his words. He noticed most of all the way she watched the mirror. At Night Ridge Station, he hung back again. "Why buses?" he asked, "not trains, not a different life." "My mother drove," she said, "and I like the intimacy of it." People argue that buses are slow. They are also precise. They go exactly where someone decided, and they ask someone like me to feel every block. There is a kind of truth in that. He said nothing for the while, absorbing the shape of that answer. Then he said, "When I see your map sketches, I think you already work in 2 jobs at once." She laughed softly. "One pays in overtime. The other pays in hope." He opened his notebook as if to write that down, then closed it again. The worst night of the season arrived without drama. The forecast had muttered about flurries. Instead, the rain snapped into ice, each droplet becoming a small, hard fact on the road. Nora guided the 14 like a hand on a sleeping child's back. At a stop near the lumberyard, a man with a sack of rock salt tried to climb aboard, slipped, and went down hard. Before Nora could leave her seat, Evan was there. He moved with the instinct of someone who had done this before, one hand keeping the man's head from striking the curb, the other lifted to halt the next step in a chain reaction of falls. When the man sat up, dazed but whole, he laughed shakily and said, "First time the ground stood up and punched me." "Tell it not to try that again," Evan said. Later, after the last passenger shuffled off into a hiss of sleet, Nora said, "You moved fast." He shrugged. "I grew up in a town where your muscles learn winter before your mind does." "What town?" He hesitated a second. "Northfield," he said, offering a less than answer of a word most people would not bother to look up. "Northfield must be stubborn," she said. "You have that stubborn look." He smiled, but there was a distance in it, like a porch light left on for someone who never came home. "Sometimes stubborn is just the shape of staying," he said. She thought about that long after he had stepped into the glittering air and disappeared. Over weeks, the rhythm of their exchanges became the bus's unofficial schedule. Some nights they barely spoke at all, and that absence was not coldness, but a kind of trust. On others, he would ask about the small civic dramas of her route, and she would tell him the stories she knew who missed a stop because the sign had been bent by a truck, which alley smelled like bread after midnight. One Sunday near dawn, when the bus was emptiest, a young rider in a restaurant uniform climbed aboard without enough for a fare. He began explaining before the door had closed, breath coming too fast, words tumbling. "I can pay next time. I just need to get to Cedar. Please, I will bring the cash tomorrow." Nora handed him a transfer that would let him ride the last leg without incident. "Bring me the cash when you can," she said. "And if you cannot, you can still get home." When she pulled into the station later, she found the transfer stub folded into a neat square and tucked by the fare box. On the back, Evan had written in his careful hand, "Thank you for choosing people over policy." It was not flattery. It was a recognition. She put the square in the pocket of her jacket and carried it like a talisman. The reveal did not explode. It slid into her life through the break room television. She had come in from a cold run, cheeks flushed, hands red. The morning news played two loud anchors, using their bright voices to keep the day moving. A story banner read, "Metropolis Transit announces service rebalancing plan." Chief of Network Strategy Evan Cole addresses mixed reactions. There he was. Not in a work jacket, but in a suit that admitted the price of its fabric. The same steadiness in his face, the same care with words, now poured into sentences about ridership trends and resource constraints, and the need to rethink late-night routes with more targeted coverage. Nora watched the video twice without hearing anything else. The crawl at the bottom named him, spelled it out. Evan Cole. She muted the screen, reopened the sound, muted it again. Toward the end of the segment, a graphic showed proposed changes. The 14 Night Ridge glowed red. Suspended pending pilot alternatives. Her stomach sank with a clean, simple motion, like a coin dropping in water. He had not lied. He had not told the truth, either. He had sat in her bus, listened to her speak about stitching the city, and kept his title folded in his pocket like an old photograph. When he boarded that night, she did not smile. She did not offer her usual nod. She pulled away from the curb like nothing in the world could move her bus but the brake and the gas. He stood by the back door and did not sit. The other riders watched in the indifferent way of people who know enough to mind their own business. At Night Ridge, when they were alone, he stepped forward. "Nora," he said. "Evan Cole," she answered. She let the name sit between them like a heavy box neither of them wanted to lift. He inhaled slowly. "I was going to tell you. I needed to ride without being treated like a title first. You rode my route while your plan put a red line through it," she said. "You wanted the truth of my bus without the cost of being honest on it." "I wanted to see the faces that would be numbers on paper," he said. "I thought it would make me more careful." "Did it?" she asked, "or did it make you better at explaining why the numbers deserved to win?" He looked more tired than defensive. "It made me remember that every data point is a person, and that memory has consequences." She stepped aside. "The consequence is this. Do not ride my bus for a while. Let us both think about who we are when we are not pretending to be nobody." He nodded once as if accepting the verdict of a court he had chosen to enter. "I am sorry," he said. She locked the doors. He was outside in seconds, and then he was gone into the night that had seemed generous only an hour before. Silence has a mass. It took up space in Nora's apartment. It took up space at the end of her shift. It sat on the counter while she made pasta and ate it standing like a tired soldier. She pulled her mother's old field bag from the closet and found the maps her mother had kept, the ones the transit authority no longer printed. She spread them on the floor and traced routes with a pencil as if tracing a bruise. The bus still needed her. That was the mercy of work. She did not have time to rehearse every unfair thing she could have said. She had to brake and accelerate to kneel the bus so old knees could find their way home to watch mirrors and corners and the particular cruelty of black ice. In the quiet between runs, she drew. Not with the clean efficiency of her small map improvements. She drew the city as a tangle of lives. She drew a boy sleeping 3 stops past his house, a cook counting tips, a woman praying not to miss her transfer. In the corner of one page, she drew a figure standing inside a bus door that would not open, hands at sides, a look that was not guilt or innocence, but something like apology. She stayed off social media. She did not want to become a symbol. She did not want to be used as an anecdote by either side. She wanted to understand what was true now. What remained was this: she had liked the way Evan paid attention. She had liked the way he chose precise words, and she had hated learning those words lived in a building where decisions traveled in suits. On a Thursday at dawn, she walked the stretch of Night Ridge where the trees wore ice like the jewelry of a patient winter. She thought for the first time in years about going back to school. She had left with only a few credits toward an associate degree. She wondered if learning more about how cities moved would make the ache smaller or sharper. There are questions that do not answer until a person is already halfway to the place where the answer lives. A week later, the storm came in, heavy and wet. It made slush of certainty. When Nora finished the last run, her shoulders felt like they had held up a building. The depot lot shone with a thin skin of water. Every light doubled in its reflection. He was there. No hood, no drink in hand, nothing to make him look harmless, except the fact that he had chosen to be cold. He stood near the chain-link fence that edged the lot and waited for her to see him. "I said not to ride my bus," she called from the door. "I did not ride," he said. "I came to return something." He held up a small envelope. It was the size of the cards the transit agency used to send at holidays. On it, her name was written in the same careful hand as the note on the transfer stub. She kept the door open and let the night blow in. "What is it?" "Something that fell from your bag the night of the ice," he said. "I did not know it was yours until I saw your mother's name on the back." He stepped forward 1 pace, the envelope held out. Inside was a photograph. Sun-faded at the edges, but someone had cleaned the surface and mended a small tear. Her mother, smiling in a way that belonged to before cancer, stood by a bus, with her hand on the number painted near the door. Nora must have been 7. She wore a backpack almost as big as her body and looked like she trusted every future at once. Nora did not realize she had stopped breathing until breath came back, as if it had walked in from the street. "Where did you find this?" "It was under a seat," he said. "I thought maybe it was just another forgotten thing." Then I saw the date and the handwriting. I had it repaired. I did not want to bring it to you until I could put it in your hand. The envelope had a card in it too. A second thing. An admissions form. She recognized the seal of the community college. Someone had filled in everything but her signature. At the bottom there was a note about a scholarship. It named the fund, not the donor, but she knew the invisibility of that kindness. It had his shape. "You had no right," she said, the words breaking in her mouth as anger and gratitude collided. "I had no right to hide my title," he said. "I am trying to learn how to do the other things right." "I do not want your charity," she said. Then call it a debt, he said quietly. Call it the cost of the education I received sitting behind you while you did your work. Call it interest on all the times I mistook data for people. The old photograph warmed in her hands. She wanted to refuse him. She wanted to lean into the chance he was offering. Both wanting at once pulled at her like currents under a bridge. "Why did you come here?" she asked. "If you wanted to help in secret, you could have mailed this." He looked down at his hands. "Because I was wrong about something important," he said. "I thought my problem was that everyone saw me as a title. It turns out my problem is I learned how to be seen that way and forgot how to be something else. You made it harder to forget. You make a lot of things harder to forget." Rain clicked against the roof of the idling bus. It sounded like a clock. She thought about all the faces she had carried through the city and what it meant to be the person who decided where the bus would go. "You could change the plan," she said. "You could decide that people who work when everyone else sleeps deserve to be carried without asking them to walk in the dark for a pilot program." "I can try," he said. "I cannot promise the votes in rooms where I am only one voice. But I can promise what I do with my voice. And I can promise to learn where I am wrong and say it out loud while there is still time to change it." She stood in the door, the photograph in one hand and the admissions form in the other. "Do not ride my bus tonight," she said, "but meet me tomorrow at the community center on Cedar where the night riders wait out transfers. Sit there and listen for 2 hours while I do my rote. Then we will talk." He nodded once like a student receiving instructions he intended to follow. Listening is work. It leaves a person tired in new muscles. The next afternoon, Nora saw him in the corner of the community center, a notebook, open, a pen poised, but not as a sword. He bought coffee for a man whose hands shook. He kept the door propped with his shoulder, while an elderly woman maneuvered a walker through a tight frame. When Nora came back from a run, she found him at a folding table with 4 night riders, hearing about distances that did not sound far on paper and felt impossible at 2 in the morning, when it was 5 degrees and the wind knifed alleys into ice. He asked the right number of questions. He did not offer solutions like candy. He did not say rebalancing. When someone used the word cuts, he did not correct them. After the second hour, she sat across from him and laid out 3 of her pencil maps. He looked not just at the routes she had drawn, but at the notes she had made in the margins. "Mrs. Bluecoat boards here. Needs kneeling time. Street light out. Teenage boy cries in this seat twice a week. Watch. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life," she said. Saying it put a heat behind her eyes as if she had been standing too close to the truth. "I used to be ashamed that I did not finish school. I am still ashamed some days. But I want to go back, and I want to build systems that do not ask people to be less human to make the math work." "You will be good at that," he said. "You already are." "Then do not make me a hypocrite on my first day back," she said. "Do not cut the 14 before you have built anything to hold the people who will fall." He did not promise her a miracle. He promised her a hearing. He promised a pilot add-on instead of a replacement. He promised that the phrase targeted coverage would no longer mean "let the dark eat the last mile." She wanted to believe him. She also wanted proof stitched into the schedule. "Come back in 2 weeks," she said. "Bring me a draft. Bring me something I can show the night riders." "I will," he said. He looked both determined and scared. It made him more real than any title ever had. Paper is not change. It is the rumor of change. But rumors can start revolutions if they are repeated in the right rooms. In the next 2 weeks, Evan turned up at the center 3 times, never empty-handed. He brought printed maps with highlighted lines that diverted a midnight run to pass 3 blocks closer to a cluster of night shift apartments. He brought a page with times that connected routes like teeth in a zipper, closing gaps riders had fallen into for years. He brought a list of streetlights prioritized for repair. He also brought the news that the suspension of the 14 had been downgraded to a revision pending pilot overlays. Ugly words, but the ugly words meant the bus would keep running, while the city tested Nightlink, a set of short shuttle loops that stitched the last mile without making people wait in the cold for 20 minutes between transfers. The first night the loops ran, Nora saw the most convincing sign that something good had happened. A nurse laughed at the stop because she had not had to sprint across the boulevard to meet the 2:15 connection. She smiled at Nora like an apology for all the times they had both accepted worse than this, because worse was how it had always been. None of it made Evan a hero. He did not want to be one. He wanted to make it harder for people to keep telling the old story of why things could not change. That more than any apology eased the knot behind Nora's ribs. She signed the admission form. Classes would start in the spring. Not salvation, direction. When she told him he did not claim credit, he asked what books he should read so he could catch up to the way she thought. They began to walk sometimes after her run nowhere grand, just along the sidewalk past the bakery that smelled like warm sugar at 1 in the morning. The air between them did not sizzle. It held steady. When his hand brushed hers, she let it stay. On a May afternoon, the community college courtyard bloomed with the noisy joy of completion. Folding chairs lined the lawn like a grid. Caps bobbed like small boats. Nora's gown felt strange on her shoulders, like a garment borrowed from a future self. She had not finished everything, but she had finished this. She was not valedictorian. She did not hold the microphone long. She gave what the program called remarks from working students. She looked out at families who had traded shifts so they could sit in those chairs. She saw Evan in the second row, not near the trustees, not near the dignitaries. He sat near the toddlers chewing tassels. His hands folded, his pride sharp enough to cut through her nervousness. "I used to think surviving was my talent," she said. "I still think that on certain nights when nothing fits and the bus rattles like a box of bones. But this year I learned something. Surviving is not the end of a story. It is the beginning you did not plan." She did not talk about him by name. She did not need to. A person in a room I thought I could not enter listened to me and decided not to leave the room until it changed a little. That is all this is, rooms changing a little until different people fit. When she came off the small stage, he met her with a ridiculous bouquet of wildflowers and a card pressed into her palm with more force than a card required. "I am going to say this clumsily," he told her, "but I love the way you look at the world, and I want to keep being someone who earns a place in it." She did not cry in public. She also did not put down the flowers. "Then keep showing up in rooms that bruise people and do not leave until the bruise is a door," she said, and he laughed, because she always made metaphors out of injuries until they healed. They did not marry that year. They bought a table. Teach a life to hold dinner, and you do not need to hurry vows. Later, they did marry a small backyard gathering behind a duplex where the landlord mowed the lawn himself and wished them well like a man who knew the math of happiness was not rent minus expenses. They hung their first picture before they hung curtains. It was the repaired photograph of Nora and her mother by the bus. Above it, they tacked a map. Not printed. Drawn. 2 hands traced the new Nightlink loops in pencil, then ink, then the thin watercolors of 2 people learning how to live in a home made of stubborn and patience. In the bottom corner, in Nora's careful block letters, they wrote a sentence they had talked about for months. "We are the map we draw for each other." Years slid by without shrinking them. The 14 kept running, slightly altered, slightly, improved its turns, written in the muscle memory of a dozen drivers who told each other the little fixes that never made it to paper. When they had a child, they named her Lena, after no one in particular, and everyone they had carried. On nights when sleep would not come for the baby, they took long drives, not on the bus, just in the old car with the seat that stuck. The city made a different sound in those hours, a kind of humming apology mixed with a promise. Evan did not always win in those rooms. Sometimes he came home with his jaw so tight it made his ears ring. Sometimes he stopped 3 blocks away and texted, "I need a circle around the block to learn how to talk like a person again." Nora would meet him at the curb, and they would walk counting the streetlights. They had replaced the stop benches that now held people up without wobbling. When Lena learned to talk, she asked what her parents did. Nora told her, "I get people home." Evan said, "I move lines on paper until they notice the people you mean." Lena frowned thoughtfully and said, "I am going to be a person you both notice," and they agreed that would be a very fine profession. Some anniversaries they went back to Night Ridge Station with a thermos of coffee and watched the 14 pull in. They did not tell anyone it was theirs. The bus belonged to the city the way stars belong to anyone who can see them. It pleased Nora to know that other drivers had memorized its secrets and added their own notes to the route. On quiet mornings before work and daycare, and all the ticking lists, Nora would run her finger along the map by the door. Her mother's photograph watched from below, like a witness who believed in more than survival. On certain mornings, Evan would stand with his forehead against the wood frame, as if listening to the echo of his own promises. They did not speak. They held the silence the way they had learned to hold it on the bus, not as a punishment, as a shelter. The day the city retired a set of ancient buses, they kept one of the number plates as a keepsake. They hung it in the kitchen above the sink where dishes stacked up like arguments. It read 14 in heavy metal type, and every time Nora stood there with her hands in suds, she smiled without meaning to, because a number can become a story if enough hearts repeat it. On a wet spring evening, when Lena was 4 and decided that raincoats were for cowards, they all ran to the car in shirts that stuck to their backs. The road shone. The city threw its lights back at itself. At the corner of River and Delaney, where once a posture had forecast trouble, a new lamp glowed wide and high. Underneath it, a man in a neon vest leaned on a bicycle and waved as if he had been waiting for them since the beginning. "Where to?" Evan asked, starting the engine as the wipers beat a slow metronome. "Home," Nora said. It had always been the answer. It would be the answer in rooms where hard voices argued and in kitchens where a child asked for second breakfast. It would be the answer when she retired someday and taught new drivers how to hold their bodies steady and their voices level. It would be the answer when the 14 belonged to someone else's hands, but not someone else's love. The bus ran past in the other lane, gray sides painted with rain. The driver waved. Nora waved back. An old code passed through glass and weather. In the rear window of the bus, for half a second, she saw herself the way she had once seen other drivers when she was a girl. A figure set in a frame of light, moving forward through a city that could be difficult and was worth it anyway. There was never a moral, only a practice. Pay attention. Choose the person over policy when you can. Remember, the maps are only good if they notice what hurts and bend toward it. Do not hide your title in rooms where it has caused fear. Do not wield it like a weapon. Hold it like a tool someone more honest than you will teach you to use. They turned onto their street. The small house waited. The crooked map glowed by the door like a low moon. Inside, the radiator clicked. The table waited for a story to be set on it. Their lives were not perfect. They were true. And they were, to an uncommon degree, home.